We will move on to House File 1082. That is my bill. It's being used as a vehicle for the Public Safety Finance Bill. We're not taking any official action today. I'm just going to stay here because we're going to have our staff walk through the DE6 amendment and then take testimony. So I will move to lay over House File 1082. And I'm just going to shift gears for a minute here. All right, I think instead of making opening remarks, I'll have staff just walk through the bill first, and then I can make some comments. Are we starting with the spreadsheet? And then, Attorney Novotny, did you want to make any opening remarks at this point, or should we just go through the bill first?
Follow your lead, ma'am.
Okay, all right, why don't we begin with Mr. Walz, if you want to walk through the spreadsheet.
Madam Chair, every member should have a copy of the spreadsheet in their packets. And Madam Chair, I apologize, this is a pre-spell check version that was handed out. So on the top line, it's House File 1082, Public Safety Finance with an E. We begin on line 1, the Department of Public Safety. In the BCA, there is House File 2742, non-fatal shooting clearance grants with a T, $1 million in fiscal year 2027. On line 8, Office of Justice Programs, House File 3946, the Domestic Violence Task Force. There is $214,000 in fiscal year 27 and $100,000 in fiscal year 28, which I believe completes the reporting requirement. On line 12, in the Office of Administration under Public Safety, we have House File 3095, First Responder Uniform ID Task Force at $100,000 in fiscal year 27, which makes a total of $1.34 million for the Department of Public Safety and $100,000 in tails. Under the Department of Corrections, we have 4 bills that all create new felony provisions, and so the numbers are bed impact. On line 23, House File 3404, impersonation of a police officer. That had a small bed impact, but was suggested to be absorbed by the governor, absorbed by the Department of Corrections in the governor's budget, and so the bill takes the same approach. On line 24, House File 3405, medical facility with 2 eyes, security, 4th degree assault. There's a bed impact of $34,000 for the tails biennium, beginning with $13,000 in fiscal year 28 and $21,000 in 29. On line 25, House File 3465, theft from a vulnerable adult. There's a bed impact of $13,000 in 27, and then $35,000 in 28, $42,000 in 29. And on line 26, House File 3489, grooming penalty. The impact is in the tails, $13,000 in 28 and $35,000 in 29. So the Department of Corrections total is $13,000 for this biennium and $159,000 in tails. On line 32, the Peace Officer Standard and Training Board, officer with 2 Fs instead of 3, is House File 4700, Philando Castile training reimbursement. Madam Chair, this is just a portion of that bill. The bill or the amendment as now constructed only rounds up the Philando Castile training reimbursement from its current level of appropriation to an even $6 million per year, and that costs $1,058,000 per year in 26 and 27, bringing the total post board to $2,116,000 in the 26-27 biennium. On line 40, we have transfers. On line 42, House File 1082, that is transfer with an N to victims of crime account for $12 million, and we show the receipt in the special revenue fund of that $12 million. Madam Chair, that brings the total for House File 1082 DE6 to $15,443,000 in this biennium and $259,000 in tails.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. And next we will have Mr. Johnson walk through the DE6.
Madam Chair, members, I'm going to walk through the language. Much of this is related to what Mr. Walls just walked through, so I'm going to start at the top of page 3. This is section 4 of the bill. This is the transfer to the Minnesota Victims of Crime account. This was the underlying House File 1082, and this language is what the committee heard that was a previous delete everything amendment to this bill. The next section that you see there, it starts at page 3, line 5. This is from Representative Steers, House File 4700. This is the adjustment to the Philando Castile Training Fund. This, again, increases the amount to $6 million each year, slightly different from what the committee heard. On page 5, at line 1, there's a use of force carry forward. This is not a new appropriation. It's from Representative Steers, House File 3440. This matches the version the committee heard in committee. I'm moving to Article 2. If you look at page 6 at line 22, this is House File 3356, Representative Hewitt's bill. These are the provisions related to decommissioning public safety vehicles before they can be sold. No changes to the language the committee heard. On page 7, starting at line 27, this is Representative Muller's House File 3946. This is a section that is a task force from that bill. There's one small change on page 9 at line 10. There's the addition of the words social worker. The next section begins on page 11 at line 1. This is the task force on the standard identification. It was House File 3695. This was Representative Johnson's bill, and there are no changes from what the committee heard. The last section in Article 2 begins on line 13.22. This is Representative Frazier's House File 2742. There are a few changes from the version the committee heard. The committee heard a version that would have had ongoing funding and would have put this in statute. The grant is getting one-time funding, so it's now going to be in session law. There's also a change to the way in which the grants must be prioritized. One of the clauses was removed that required that the agency show that it had excessive number of unsolved cases and inadequate staffing. That has been removed. There's also a new paragraph B on page 14 at line 22. This would require that half of the appropriation go to agencies outside of the metropolitan area. I'm moving to Article 3. The first section in Article 3 is on page 16, starting at line 3. This is House File 3504. This was Representative Duran's bill. There's one small change. Previously, the bill referred to security officers. Now there's a security guard with a cited definition. The next few sections are from Representative Bennett's House File 3489. This goes from line 1622 to the top of page 18. These are the grooming crimes from House File 3489. The next section is the impersonating a peace officer crime. It starts on page 18 at line 3. This is Representative Cleavorn's bill, House File 3404. This is the current version that is on the floor as well. The final section in the bill is from Representative Lieveling's House File 3465. It's on page 20, starting at line 16, and this increases the penalties for theft from a vulnerable adult. Madam Chair, that's the whole bill.
All right. Thank you for that. And we do have some testifiers who signed up to speak to the DE6 amendment. We have Director Kramer and Director Bronson. You want to make your way to the testifier table. Welcome back to the committee. If you want to introduce yourself and begin your testimony, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Katie Kramer, and I'm the co-executive director of Violence Free Minnesota. We are a coalition of over 90 member programs that provide services to victims of domestic and sexual violence in every corner of our state. I'm here today on behalf of all 6 crime victims coalitions: Violence Free Minnesota, Mending the Sacred Hoop Coalition, Cinnamon is here with us today, the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, the Minnesota Alliance on Crime, and the Minnesota Children's Alliance. Together, our network of over 150 crime victim service providers ensures that every Minnesotan has a place to go when they are experiencing violence and crime. I'm here today to strongly support the request to add $12 million to HF 1082 to stabilize funding for crime victim services. Crime victim services are a core part of Minnesota's public safety infrastructure. This committee heard from many of our advocacy programs last week about the critical services provided by our network, and you will hear from one more today. Every day, advocates are working on the front lines, answering crisis calls, helping survivors create safety plans, finding emergency shelter, accompanying survivors to court, and supporting children who witness or experience violence. Across our network, programs are already operating beyond capacity. Shelters are full. Advocates are carrying overwhelming caseloads. Survivors are being placed on wait lists or turned away, not because programs don't want to help, but because they simply do not have the resources. Due to the flat funding over the past several years, combined with the increased demand for services, our programs have already had to make impossible decisions. Decisions like reducing staff, cutting violence prevention and community outreach efforts, limiting their services, or closing entire facilities. And now Minnesota Crime Victim Services are facing a 20% cut in funding. Let me be clear about what that means. In our rural communities, a 20% reduction doesn't mean fewer services. It could mean the loss of the only domestic violence program in the area. Our fewer remaining standalone rape crisis centers and children's advocacy centers will face an even greater pressure to merge with larger organizations or close their doors entirely. When a program disappears, survivors do not stop needing help. Instead, they have nowhere to go. They may stay with an abusive partner. They may become homeless. Or the violence may escalate with consequences not only for survivors, but for children, for neighbors, for first responders, and for whole communities. Crime Victim Services coalitions and member programs are not seeking for an expansion. We are asking to maintain what already exists, to keep shelter doors open, to keep advocates in their roles, to ensure that when someone reaches out for help, there is someone there to answer. Minnesota has long been a national leader in addressing domestic violence. The coordinated community-based model we built works, but only if it's sustained. This is a pivotal moment. Chair and members, the question before you is the same one that you've heard before. What are you willing to lose? Because without this investment, we will lose services, we will lose capacity, and ultimately we will risk losing lives. We urge you to support this funding and stand with survivors across Minnesota. Thank you for your leadership and for helping to keep our community safe.
Thank you. Welcome, Director Bronson. You can begin.
Thank you, chairs and members of this committee. My name is Tina Bronson. I'm the co-executive director of Alexandra House, Anoka County's only comprehensive domestic and sexual violence agency, serving more than 18,900 victims, survivors, family members every year. I want to tell you about Stephanie. After nearly 10 years of abuse, she fled with her children with only 3 small bags, and she came to our shelter. She stayed for 11 weeks. Our advocates helped her get an order for protection, stood by her in court, ensured that her kids felt safe again. Today, she has stable housing, a job, and has taken her kids on their first vacation. She told us without Alexandra House, she wouldn't have been able to do it. That's what Crime Victim Services funding makes possible, and what makes us unique. Survivors don't need to be ready to press charges, file for an order for protection, or even leave their partners when they walk through our doors. Unlike prosecutors, we don't wait for an investigation. And unlike police, we focus solely on the victim's immediate needs. We fill a niche in the public safety that would otherwise go unmet. Across Minnesota, agencies like Alexandra House are weaving together a funding quilt that has state grants, federal dollars, and private support. And that quilt is unraveling. Since 2018, our state funding has remained flat, while our inflation has risen 28%. Leaving us $610,000 below our 2018 purchasing power. We've absorbed that quietly for 8 years. But that meant losing 13 positions, cutting 2 programs, and downsizing our physical space. A 20% cut, more than $360,000, would mean eliminating another 4 to 5 positions, gutting an entire service area. For instance, our legal advocacy is already stretched beyond capacity. 4 advocates overwhelmed with survivors waiting for help that should have been immediate. A cut of this magnitude would make that worse. Fewer advocates, longer waits, whole programs absorbed or eliminated. Anoka County would still have Alexandra House. but survivors would have far less of us. Chairs and members, echoing what you've heard, what are you and what is the state of Minnesota willing to lose by not authorizing more funding? Crime victim services are not optional. They're a critical part of our public safety systems, and we're not asking to grow. We're just asking to remain. Please protect this funding. The people of Anoka County and Minnesota are counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you both for your testimony. We can move on to member discussion now, and I'll just note a couple of things. For the law enforcement training dollars, the amount that we ended up choosing for this bill was based on what the request was last year from the law enforcement groups, that we funded it around 10 million, the request was 12 million. And so that's what this bill does, is really makes whole the request that they came to us with at the beginning of the biennium. I will say too, for the victim services funding, and I don't know if anyone is going to have questions for you, so you could probably not have to stay there if you don't want.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I would say for the victim services funding, you know, we really started talking last year about trying to create sustainable funding, because for years we have thought the federal government was going to start paying again through the VOCA funds. Again, this has spanned multiple administrations over 10 years, and so we've tried to keep their funding stable, but as they said, it hasn't kept up with costs and with inflation, so it's actually already resulted in cuts. And so the 12 million is just the bare minimum to keep this funding stable. And I really hope that in future legislative sessions, you all can think about ways to creatively find other sources of sustainable funding for these programs, because they're so vital to all of our communities. And I would encourage all the members, if you haven't done so yet, to tour any of these providers in your districts. I know that was something we talked about doing collectively as a committee this summer, and then this summer happened, so we didn't have a chance to do that as a committee, but really encourage everybody to get out and talk to the victim services providers in your district and see the great work they're doing with what little funds that they're doing. And with that, we can move to, do you want to make a comment now, or should we see if there's any discussions, Chair? Okay, discussion to the bill. Representative Harder.
Thank you, Chair Mueller. My question, the 12 million for the Minnesota Crime Victim Services account, is that a one-time payment, or is that done by grants, or how does that get distributed?
Yeah, so I don't know if someone's here from Department of Public Safety that wants to answer. Yeah, come on up. Director Baybine's here, and she can talk about how the money is distributed. The 12 million is one-time funding, and they'll distribute that the way they currently distribute their grants. Director Baybine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative, members of the committee. Kim Baybine, Executive Director of Office of Justice Programs at the Department of Public Safety. The 12 million would be added to base funding that we have from the state, as well as federal funding, and would be distributed through a competitive process. That competitive process is actually already open right now. It would add, instead of having a total of this much money, it would give us about the same amount of funding that we've had in previous years. So it would be distributed through that competitive process.
Any follow-up, Representative Harder? Okay. While you're there, any other questions for Director Baybine? Okay, you can be released. Thank you. Vice Chair Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a statutory construction question, maybe for nonpartisan staff, that I just wanted to make sure I understood. Excuse me. On page 17, we have the definition of grooming at line 17.10, and that in and of itself is a felony. And then it says may be sentenced as provided in subdivision 4, which is not subdivision 4 of this bill. And then we have the school context specifically, which carves out, it says if the person is more than 36 months older than the child. And I'm just thinking about that because, like, my son is in high school and his girlfriend's a year younger than him. And so I'm just thinking, what about those relationships? Like I don't mean to make it weird, but I'm just like what about like kids who are in a relationship and then one of them turns 18? Is that a felony then if they're still in a relationship? So that's my question.
All right, Mr. Diebel.
Madam Chair and members, No, that sub-offense only applies when there's a position of authority. So we're targeting, the bill is targeting those who work at the school and come in contact with the minors, and then that establishes that 36-month gap.
Okay, Vice Chair Feist, thank you. That's what I thought, but when I was reading it, it wasn't reading that way to me, but that makes sense to me, and I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
All right, and I will note that in the criminal sexual conduct statutes, there is a whole section on the age differentials to try to account for those situations that you're talking about, which is already in law.
Cool, I need that. I was like, I'm not seeing it here. Cool, thank you.
All right. Do you have any? Oh, okay. All right. Chair Navani.
Thank you, Chair Moeller. It's a compact package that we put together that is bipartisan, and I appreciate the work that everyone put in it, including the nonpartisan staff, and look forward to getting this to the floor and getting it passed.
Thanks, Chair, and I'll just add to really appreciate, we'll have more time for comments tomorrow. That'll be the last day that you chair this committee, and I'll maybe make some more comments then too, but I'll just say it's been a pleasure working together, and I'm glad in spite of the circumstances we've had the last couple of years, a very unusual set of circumstances and a lot of really awful and stressful events for our state, that we've still been able to put together a policy package and this finance package and pass many, many bills to the House floor, and I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do together as a committee, and really appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness here. So thank you.